But this one, what I'm hoping to do with this presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a paper that was done by a designer on innovation. And we'll talk a little bit about what he talked about innovations and what he thought deeply about it. And then what I'm hoping, and I'm going to go through examples of the different kinds of innovation he was talking about, and even examples from my past and things that I've done. And I'm hoping that it'll be, and then at the end, I'm going to actually present a problem. And I'm not going to present any solutions. I'm going to present a broad problem, and it's not a problem we need to solve now. And it's not a problem that is going to come on the top of our list of problems to solve, but it's just a broad problem that I hope might spark some innovative ideas or interest or inspiration, right? That's what I'm hoping. So the designer that I was talking about, his name is Don Norman. This is him. Don Norman is, he has a distinction of being the first person to have in a job title, user experience as their job title, right? He was pretty much, Don Norman is the one who created design at Apple. That was a huge part of that in the early 90s when he was hired on at Apple to think about design. And Norman is a very thoughtful fellow, and he was thinking about what design was doing. And obviously, Apple created a whole, it could just changed our industry completely when it comes to design, because before Apple, it was people like me that was designing software, and I designed software for software engineers, not for people, right? And it was not a good thing, but designers came along and said, we now know how to design for people, and they have something called human-centered design, and Don Norman was a big part of that. And as he was thinking about design and how it applied to software and how it applied to really everything, he was thinking, we see that there's this incremental innovation that happens with design, but there are other things that happen with major technological shifts that are outside of design that are also innovation. And he was questioning, A, how important is design? How big is this thing? And what are the limits of design? And so he wrote a paper with somebody else. And in that paper, this is a diagram from the paper. And it's a very abstract diagram. Just think about this as a technological landscape. And he pointed out that design, human-centered design, that's what the HCD is for. That human-centered design is very good at doing this incremental innovation and making the system that you currently have that's providing a value, making that get better and better and better incrementally until you reach a peak of that technological landscape. He said, but then what often happens is there's a major event that happens. Catastrophic event, and that catastrophic event is often a technological change. There's some sort of new technology that comes along, and his other author came in and said there's also a meaning change that could happen. And when this technological change happens, it then creates a new shift, and sometimes it gets us to another peak, another hill to climb that's below where we're currently at. But with human-centered design, we can climb up and get to the top of that innovative peak. And he, in the paper, he actually then cataloged them and described them, labeled them as incremental innovation and radical innovation. And for example, in incremental innovation, and this is a really simple, dumb example, and that is what color scheme are we going to use? We can actually test that out very incrementally, and we can find out that in this test that our red inside blue has some significance and makes things better, and so we're going to actually change our color scheme to be this, or whatever flow or design or whatever that incremental innovation is. Radical innovation typically comes with new technologies like quantum computing, artificial intelligence, or virtual and altered reality. These are completely new technologies that will make us think about our problems completely differently. And so they'll come up with that spawns innovation. And then to flesh that out, when he talked about a meaning change, this is a good example of a meaning change, and Apple was really good at changing the meanings. And when the iPhone came out, Apple clearly changed the meaning of what a phone was. right? And everybody now thinks about their phone very differently because of what Apple did, and they did a completely change of meaning there. I like to focus on the technological changes and the incremental human-centered design changes or innovations, and I focus on those because this requires a lot of influence in different areas that we don't have yet, although I think at some point we may change what storage means, right? The difference of storage, and have a completely different meaning change there. But for the most part, you need like a Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs. Elon Musk who can tell LA, yeah, I'm gonna bore holes through your city, underneath your city, right? Or a Steve Jobs who can tell AT&T, if you're gonna do this, then you need to change your relationship with your customers and have a new contract. That is a unlimited contract. Before Steve Jobs did that, there was no unlimited contracts like that. And so we don't really have that gravitas or power, but we do have the technology and we do have design ability. So I'm gonna give you an example of a hackathon where this is what I would call an incremental change. Now, when I was working at a company, we had a problem where we had quite a few engineers, one bathroom on the floor, one male bathroom and one female bathroom, and it was mostly male software engineers. And so every time you went to the bathroom, the chances of you waiting in line to actually get a stall was pretty high. And so what we wanted to do, it wasn't like we could actually increase the number of bathroom stalls, but we decided instead that we wanted to have an early warning system, something that you could tell people whether or not you could go to the bathroom now, right? And we backronym the name of the system to the Critical Relief Assessment Potty System, and obviously CRAPS, it's a backronym. And so what we ended up doing was we had a piece of hardware. This is a proximity sensor that has two speakers. One, it sends a audio signal out, and the other receives the audio signal back, and so it can measure the distance of the object in front of them. And so if you put those sensors just above the toilet, then if somebody's standing there, it'll let you know what it's bouncing off of, how far that is. And we then put it inside some Arduino microprocessors in a box and wired up the bathrooms. And then we created this box right outside the door. And so on the door, each of those lights corresponds with a stall, and it would tell you if the stall was occupied or if it was available as you were walking by, so you didn't have to walk in the bathroom. And then we took it a step further, and we put a net shield over the Arduino, so you could then have a web page where that was the prominently displayed web page on our floor now, was this web page of what the occupancy of the bathrooms were like. I think we ended up winning that hackathon. We did hackathons there. They had competitions, and we ended up winning that hackathon. In fact, the last time I remember, this was at Zappos, and they were doing some different things there, and they were actually discussing taking this idea and turning it into a product, which was kind of interesting because Zappos sells shoes, not bathroom equipment. I briefly considered changing my title to restroom engineer. But my boss made a good point. He said, well, what happens if you go apply it somewhere else and they call up here to ask what your title was and we tell them restroom engineer? I'm like, oh, that's a good point. I guess I'll say software engineer. So that was an example. I mean, you think about it, that's an incremental innovation, right? We had a lot of fun doing it, and it's a little clever. I worked with a really great team, but all that's doing is making the bathroom, this typical standard bathroom experience, a little bit better, right? This is an example of what I would call a radical innovation. Also at Zappos, during a hackathon, we had moved to this building downtown. We actually took over City Hall and renovated it. And as we renovated it, we created a bunch of open space areas for people to lounge around in. And then we also had open office areas. And one of the problems that I ran into that we were talking about as we were trying to solve this problem is with the very generous outdoor areas and the open space areas, whenever you had a seating chart, it didn't make any difference, right? You couldn't tell where people would be at any given time because they could be anywhere. And so I wanted to come up with a system where we could actually find out where people were, right? Just physically where they are right now if you needed to go find them, right? And so the way I solved that was we started talking about it, And we thought we could probably do something with Wi-Fi access points. And we had all sorts of different ways we could do it. One of them was if you could actually identify what Wi-Fi access point you're actually connected to, and then display that on a web page, then you could at least show an area that the person's likely in. But we also found out that if you have the signal strength from a Wi-Fi signal, from a Wi-Fi access point, when you have the signal strength, you can actually calculate the distance from that Wi-Fi access point. And so then we figured if you had 3 different Wi-Fi access points within range, then you can trilaterate that specific location for some person. So we wanted to actually do that. We wanted to find, we could actually, in the office, locate where all the Wi-Fi access points were, put it on a grid, and then also say, this is where you're at once you have 3 points. We did find out that we started to have some problems. As I was starting to build this, I was building the software to scan the Wi-Fi signals. As I was beginning to build that, this is a guy who was on the team, and he was over on the corner very quietly. He clearly had some spot of inspiration, and part of it was around the fact that we weren't getting good distance measurements from the signals that we had created, and we were trying to solve this problem. And it's because they were, Wi-Fi is noisy. It was a very noisy signal. And so we weren't really getting very accurate distance measurements. And he was just over there very quietly on the first day. And then at the end of the first day, he decided, he told us, he said, I just figured it out. He said, what we can do, he had just taken a course on machine learning. And he said, we can use, this is a classic machine learning prediction problem. And he said, what we can do for each floor, we can create a grid and then just train all the Wi-Fi signals for several spots on the floor. Just go to one spot and say, this is the XY axis, and this is the full Wi-Fi signal. And so it doesn't matter how noisy it is, because it's going to be an average of noisy however many times you train it. And it doesn't matter if it's a complete accurate a representation of the distance, because it's what it is for this building. Right? The X, Y for these signals are here. And so we went around and trained a bunch of different points on the floor and then put it through a machine learning model. And sure enough, we came out where even with like 11 trained points on the floor, we could get within 10 feet of where the person actually was. And so that was good enough for our original problem, which was if we can find out where people are, if we ever need to go find them or whatever. So, and I consider that to be an example of a radical innovation because, we were able to do it with this new technology of machine learning that he was just happened to be thinking about, right? So I thought that was kind of cool. So those are 2 examples of the different kinds of innovation. So what is the next big thing? What is the thing that I think about a lot? And I do think about this a lot. And I'm just going to present the problem, like I say, and then I don't know that there's a solution right now, but I don't have a slide for this, but have you all heard of a future economy called the Star Trek economy, or the age of abundance? Have you heard of that before? Or our post-scarcity economy, right? All of those, there's a lot of writings about this. People are talking about this, and I actually like the Star Trek economy term because I'm a geek and I like Star Trek. And if you think about it, on Star Trek, why do people on Star Trek work on the ship? They don't work on the ship to provide for their family. They work on the ship because that's what they want to do. They want to be in stargazing, or they want to be in engineering, or they want to be on security because they believe in the mission of Star Trek. And it's because all of their wants and a majority of their needs are provided at marginal cost, right? It's a marginal cost to run a replicator, for example, to feed everybody. And so, and the idea is, at some point, as our free market systems get more and more efficient, that at some point we are going to be able to provide all the needs and a majority of the wants to everybody in society at marginal cost. And at that point, you're going to be able to really choose where and how you want to work and what you want to work on, not based on providing for your family yourself, but based on what you really value and what you really want to increase society. And so this is an example, and as you look at it, you can see over time all the needs of people, the relative cost of those needs of people are decreasing over time. And that's a consistent model we can see, especially where free markets emerge. Things get cheaper and cheaper. Food, energy, clothing, right? That was another one. I don't have a chart for that. But you can see it's decreasing, 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 except for one. There's one need in society that is actually increasing, and that is housing, right? Housing costs, people need places to live, and housing costs are going up. And so then you ask the question, well, why is that? How do we solve that problem? What's that?
Scarcity.
Yeah, well, it's an artificial scarcity. You're absolutely right. It is scarcity, but I'm going to show you it's an artificial scarcity. And I'll show you why. So this is median rents and median households, like even renting, household costs, everything's going up over time rather than down. And in order for us to get to this Star Trek economy where we can all pursue the value that we really want to pursue in society, in order for us to get there, this is a problem that has to be solved. Now, you're right, it's scarcity. And we tend to think, like we have this notion that the world is overpopulated, right? We think that that's the problem, we have too many people, right? And I'm going to show you some things that actually blew me away when I first found this out a couple of years back. But this is an example of the world population is 7.5 billion people. And if you gave all 7.5 billion people 1,000 square feet per person to live in, that comes out to 7.5 trillion square feet. And that is the whole world population fitting inside the state of Texas with 1,000 square feet. That was shocking to me when I first found out about it. I thought it had to be a mistake, that it was not real. I dug into it, like, no, it's absolutely real. Obviously, there are complications to that because, like, you think about it, my house right now is a pretty large house. It's over 3,000 square feet. But I have 8 people that live. Imagine that if I had an 8,000 square foot. I mean, that's a mansion, right? So that's plenty of space for me to actually live in. But obviously, we also need more space to grow food and all that kind of stuff too, right? But the point is, it's kind of shocking to think about. So our problem is not scarcity of space. Our problem is scarcity of desired space, right? Because generally, the reason people pick where they are living is largely because that's where the jobs are. They're following the jobs. And this is a heat map of tech jobs in the United States. And you can see that we have these centers and hubs. And if anybody's ever tried to buy a house in California in general, but certainly San Francisco, it's like nigh to impossible, right? Same thing with Seattle. Even Salt Lake's getting that. Our housing prices are going up and up and up because this is where the jobs are. This is a heat map of where the jobs are. And so the problem is not a scarcity of space. It's a scarcity of space around jobs. How do we solve this problem? What are the things that we do in order to solve this? Well, we can spread technology, but people have tried that. They tried it down in Vegas, tried to create a tech culture down there. It didn't quite work, and there's all sorts of reasons as to why that is. But I'm going to propose a different one. If the problem is we're trying to go to places where there's jobs, if we need to move where the jobs is, how about we make it so we don't have to do that? And we see there is incremental innovation towards that, right? If you don't have to be there, then you can live anywhere, right? You can live out in Wyoming next to a big lake on 15 acres that cost, $30,000, right? And you could do that when you are actually working now remotely. But this is an incremental innovation. What we have here at Zoom is incremental innovation. And what we have, we're doing better, and we see more and more incremental innovations. It used to be when I first started my career out, I remember doing a video conference to Hong Kong once, and it was just impossible, right? It was a very expensive, I think it was like a A25 line or whatever, but it was a very expensive line. I was doing a video conference, and I mean, it was just so choppy, we couldn't even understand each other ever. There was no point to it, honestly. So we had to go back to the phone lines, but even the phone lines, there's a lot of nonverbal communication that you don't get, that doesn't happen. So this is incremental innovation. And I'm even going to say that it's not quite there yet. That what we have, it's getting better, But what we have is not as good as us being together. And the thing that I talk about the most about us being together is the serendipitous interactions that happen, the conversations that you overhear that somebody else is having, that oftentimes it's just a distraction. Other times it's like, I've got something to add to that if you don't mind. Or, hey, let me ask more about that because I didn't know about that. There's this shared information and knowledge that happens in that serendipity that you don't get with these new technologies. And then you get these other problems, right? This is something that it happens every time whenever we get together. It's like somebody shares a screen. Can you see my screen yet? Can you see my screen? You see it over and over again. So there's obviously not as nice. What are some of the radical ideas on solving this problem? This is Ray Kurzweil. If you've not read any of his books, they will probably bend your mind if you want to actually read them. He's an interesting fellow. He works at Google right now. I think he's a director, maybe even a vice president over some of their artificial intelligence stuff. He's really well known in computer science for natural language processing. He did a lot of the early stuff and even current stuff for natural language processing. He's also a little kooky in that he actually believes that not too far distant future, we're going to be able to transfer our consciousness into computers and live forever that way, right? And that's something he's trying to achieve. He's trying to go for that, right? Really brilliant. He's got some good ideas for believing that. Maybe I'll talk about that at some point. But that's not what this is about. He does talk a lot about, and one of the interesting things that he's done is he's sort of a Nostradamus of tech. He will predict when a certain tech will be advanced enough to bring a specific benefit to society. And his, for virtual reality, for fully immersive virtual reality, he says it's 2030. 2030 is when we have fully immersive virtual reality. And when you think, and here he is talking about how we have auditory virtual reality now. Right, because we can communicate auditorily pretty well. And I'm going to suggest that what we need for the virtual office space that is like us all being there is just auditory and visual virtual reality, immersive. We don't need, I mean, most of the time you probably, want to avoid the smells of other people, right? So you don't really need the smells, you don't really need the sensory feedback or touch, but auditory and visual is what we need. And so once we get that, if we actually had fully immersive auditory and visual virtual reality environments, then imagine sitting down at your desk at home, putting on your headset, and then I can look left and I see Hazley there at her virtual desk while she's sitting in her office. I look right and I see Roy. I actually hear the conversation that Chris is having with Sean behind me. It's like I'm actually there in a very virtual office. And it has extra benefits as well, because you can also create whatever environment you really want for that virtual office, tailor to yourself, and also have any number of screens that you possibly want at any length of resolution. I'll tell you, I've actually started to work on some of this just on my own spare time. The technology is not quite there yet to give you for me, it's not good enough for me to be in a virtual environment and be as productive in a virtual environment as I could be outside. But the technology is going to get there soon. Once it gets there, that's when I think this is going to be able to happen and help us solve this problem. Anyway, that's it. That's all I got. Any questions?
Just a comment. So you originally outlined the two sources, I guess, or definitions of what radical
innovation. Yeah.
One of them was technology, which you kind of demonstrated here is an increase in AR, VR type thing that can sustain that radical innovation.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking the other one is like, well, what does it mean to be together? Because that's what you kept saying. It's like,
it's a good point.
It's being apart, and you don't get this interaction and stuff because we're not together. What does that mean?
Yeah.
How would that definition change, become the innovation? So,
it's actually a really good point. That is a change in meaning.
Yeah.
To help spawn that radical innovation. Yeah, very good insight. Any other thoughts or?
I have a question on the the wireless access points and the
Yeah.
triangulation and stuff. What was the accuracy before the machine learning model like?
So we actually never got to a point where we were comfortable enough to do the actual trilateration. As we were building those, I remember the first thing I did was I had to build something that would actually grab what I call the Wi-Fi signature profile. And while I was grabbing those, there were other people who were doing some preliminary tests for the distances, and they were getting a wild swing in the distance between, from one access point. And so we never actually built the trilateration question. So we never really were able to test its accuracy. My guess is because of the noisiness of Wi-Fi signals, I don't think it's actually possible. But I could be wrong. I'm going to point out to you as well, I gave the same presentation at Instructure. It was like before I actually met Matt, but Matt was in the room. Matt asked that exact same question, which I think is funny.
That's funny.
Any other insights or questions? Cool.
Fun.
Thanks for coming. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.